Welcome to the Sustainable Development Strategies for Higher Education Institutions Massive Open Online course. My name is Jessica Siegel.
And I'm Judith Herstrip.
And today we will present to you
Module 5, Community Impact. At the end of the module, you will be able to create your own theory of change and therewith translate theory into practice.
At first, we will have a look at the theory-informed definition of impact and why it matters. We will also talk about the community and how you can define your own community, and how to approach root causes, how to understand the real causes of problems that you can tackle with community impact actions. We will have a brief look at effective partnerships and why they are important. If you want to learn more about this, please check out Module 6, that is entirely dedicated to partnerships. And last but not least, my colleague Judith will show you how you can assess community impact, how to measure the actual impact that you're creating, how to come up with indicators that help you identify whether your action really has an effect or not. So let's have a look what impact actually means and why it matters. Impact is everywhere. Climate change has an impact on agriculture in Africa. The Supreme Court has impact on wildlife, but also on gigantic asteroids, the weather, and even smartphones have an impact on students' learning experience. As you can see, impact can have positive or negative, intended or unintended, and direct or indirect effects. So how can we actually define impact? Because it seems so vague, and critics even said that it's just a hyperbole. Impact is different from effect and result and consequences. It doesn't have to be tangible. It is driven by multiple factors, and it is time sensitive. It can appear long after an action has already taken place. It is also relational, meaning that it consists of different components and cannot be traced back to only one action. But there are different circumstances leading to this impact. Why is it beneficial for you to talk about impact? Why is it beneficial for you to create your own theory of change? Impact and a theory-informed idea of impact that explains how and why a measurable change has taken place based on causal relations helps you to really understand the root causes of problems and challenges. It also helps you to identify said causal relationships. It helps you to measure the effects of your action and to really see how you make progress with your intervention. It helps you to determine what effects can be attributed to your intervention and what effects might be caused by something external, totally different from your intervention. And thus it helps you to evaluate your community impact. So, like I said, I already mentioned the term community impact. We want to drive global change, or we will help you to drive global change by creating impact in your local community. Community impact is dedicated to the well-being of specific communities. It leads to direct localized outcomes, and human interaction is key. Stakeholder engagement, going out and talking to the people. So community impact and sustainable development are actually closely related. Both create successful, concrete steps to the best quality of life, both for everyone and in our region. Sustainability and impact both make us think about the long-term consequences of our decisions and actions. As you've already learned in Module 1, sustainability is characterized by a systemic character. This means that sustainability is multidimensional, consisting of an environmental, an economic, a cultural, and a social dimension. It is also globally interconnected. So if you target a certain SDG in your local area, it also always has an effect on other parts of the world. It is contextual, meaning that people from a different culture or even an academic discipline have different attitudes and beliefs about sustainability. They work on different solutions, so that's why multi-stakeholder engagement, talking to your community, is essential to create a vision that everyone can go with. Sustainability is time sensitive. You need to balance long-term and short-term goals, and you need to keep future needs and risks in mind while developing your action for community impact. And it is also cross-sectorial, meaning that something that is happening in one sector, maybe the energy sector, also influences other sectors. For example, how products are being produced in the industry. This means sustainability requires a holistic approach and active stakeholder engagement. And this is also what community impact and a theory of change are good for. Community impact is helpful for localizing the SDGs. This means the implementation of the SDGs in a local context. Through ripple effects, this can lead to global systemic change. It also makes sure, community impact, that sustainable development efforts are culturally relevant and follow culturally relevant pathways. It helps to create synergies between different already existing initiatives and certain SDGs. It leads to attitudinal and behavioral change because when you involve stakeholders into the development of solutions and new approaches, they better understand the benefits, and this reduces the resistance towards change. That's kind of normal for our human beings. It also facilitates inclusion because community impact actually goes out and tries to talk to the people most affected by certain challenges. It raises the voices of vulnerable and marginalized communities. So this is why the mantra Think Global, Act Local is so important. It highlights place-based work as essential for achieving overall global change. But local actions also need to be harmoniously integrated with global sustainability objectives. So now let's talk about what community is and how we can identify root causes of certain sustainability challenges that we want to tackle with our community impact approach, with our action and intervention or project. So what is a community? What are we talking about when we talk about community impact? A community can be a smaller or bigger social unit, and they usually share certain communalities. For example, the same interests, desires, or concerns. They also share a sense of belonging, like an identity, and this is often expressed through rituals, collective action, and social connections. They are also open and inclusive, and there are different social units that intersect or overlap, and there's a commitment to the functioning of the social group. And all of this together, a joint understanding of this community facilitates systemic change. It is important when you approach community impact to go out and talk to the people most affected by a certain challenge, a situation, and accordingly the solution you're trying to offer them with your action or intervention. So it is important to consult them and ask them, what is your story? What is your concern? And how can we improve the situation or prevent certain things from getting worse? The SDGs, although functioning as a global blueprint towards action for sustainability, are often met with a lot of criticism because they're perceived to be top-down policies. Stakeholders are often regarded as passive recipients instead of co-designers and co-creators. That's why community impact, and especially a bottom-up approach, is so important. Because a bottom-up approach, a community impact intervention, makes sure that all activities are rooted in the actual practice of sustainability, as lived and embodied, grounded in specific local and regional contexts. They really meet the needs of people. So how can we understand root causes to actually make a change? Because that is the key to progress. Instead of just fighting symptoms, it is quintessential to ask ourselves, but why? If we realize that there's a problem, for example, young children in our region cannot read as well anymore, we have to ask, but why? And we keep doing this again and again until we reach a point, a cause that we can tackle and for which we can actually create new ideas, new solutions and actions towards change. This also helps finding SDG priorities. So maybe in our example, SDG 4, quality education, is very important for a region. In other regions, maybe SDG 16, peace and justice, is more important. As you can see, effective partnerships are the core of community impact. And not only that, they are the core of the SDGs as well. As you can see, SDG 17 is dedicated to partnerships especially. So we have a module dedicated to partnerships, module 6. Please feel free to check out module 6 if you want to learn more about partnerships. I will only briefly discuss partnerships in this presentation. Transformative partnerships are necessary and prevail community impact and interventions for community impact. They are necessary to figure out the community. Like I said, you need to raise the voices of the people most affected, and you need to learn about the root causes. And this can be done, for example, by consulting the people. They are also necessary partnerships to build a strong network for action. You can rely on existing initiatives. You need to talk about diverse perspectives, and intermediaries can accelerate your action. This can be done, for example, by mapping and networking. In the envisioning phase, you bring all stakeholders together and you ask what matters to us. What are our SDG priorities? Where should we work? Where should we begin our work? The 17 rooms is a method that can be used here. It is important to realize that it's not so much about everyone has to agree with everything that's being said, but you have to reach consent. There are no significant objections against the vision your multi-stakeholder partnership came up with. No one is against the thing you're trying to reach with your theory of change or your intervention, and you share the responsibility. This can be written down through statements. Last but not least, continuous stakeholder engagement is absolutely necessary for community impact because it helps to present transparency, to showcase success, and helps you to get regular feedback. This can be done, for example, through fora.
Thank you, Jessica, for all the insights you already delivered. Now we'll move to part 4, assessing community impact. And as you can draw from the icons below the headline here, this concerns all SDGs. A colleague of mine, Dominika Vrook, said once, actors who want to influence societal debates are tempted to communicate numbers, even if these numbers are only weakly supported by scientific research. What she aimed for said, you better have a number than not measuring at all. So let's dive into it. We have very different levels of analysis. First of all, we have the micro level, and that's most likely the level you will be concerned with. It's a single initiative, it's your project, it's a single organization. So it's more about individual impact. The second level is a meso level. Here we talk about context, about frameworks, and here the core is institutional change. So as you can see, the first one is individual, the second one is institutional. The third one is the macro level. That concerns changes in structures, values, and norms. So all the institutions, how we behave, how we think about each other, how we think of nature, how we think of social issues. And this is what we refer to as transformative change. The United Nations claims that society needs a better statistical compass to shift emphasis from measuring economic phenomena to actually measuring sustainable development. And this is what we are concerned with in this MOOC. A core issue here is the theory of change. That is a method that explains how and why a given intervention, or in your case, your project, will lead to change. And this is based on specific assumptions and on a causal analysis based on evidence, ideally. So what is cause? Cause is basically the trigger or the region for a change. These are your measures and activities. The effect or the effects are the predicted outcomes. They can either be direct, indirect, they can be intended, unintended, they can be positive and also negative. So if you measure your impact, you have to consider all 4 or 3 distinct types. So direct, intended positive, indirect, intended negative, and all combinations. What are relevant terms? I mean, it's always difficult when we think about terms because they are used widely, but everybody understands something different. So the first is activities. I think that's quite clear. So this is what we do. The second one is outputs. That are the results of your activities. So what comes out. So the outcomes then, and here you already see that I'm mixing up things, is the likely or achieved effect of an output. So let me give you some examples. Activities is, for example, a provision of a workshop. And with regard to outputs, for example, you have carried out 7 workshops with 20 people attending these workshops. And an outcome would be that there is an improved awareness of sustainability, or even a more significant impact would be when people change their behavior. So this is only part of the story. The fourth one is the impact. So what about that? What we know is that we have basically 2 different schools of thought. So the first one defines impact at the final level of the logic model of the TOC. So impacts differs from outcomes, as outcomes refer to as the impact refers to the long-term effects. So changes at the systemic, or as we said earlier, macro level. The other school of thought understands impact as the attributable outcomes. So it is basically the difference between the effect with the intervention and without the intervention. Let me clarify this to you. So imagine we have an intervention. You have a start date and an end date of this intervention, and you observe a total effect. So, for example, people changing their behavior. So now you must imagine what would have happened without your intervention. That is the so-called dead weight. And if you subtract from the total effect the dead weight, then this is your attributable outcome or impact. And here we now move to the so-called IOOI model, input, output, outcome, impact model. If you think about this model, you first of all consider your context. So what is the rationale in your region or in your neighborhood? So interestingly, we start with the outcomes. You might wonder why, but you will see soon. So you think about what you wish to achieve, what you envisage for sustainable development with your concrete project. Then you think about what outputs do I need to generate to achieve that outcome. So it's a backwards link here. Then you think, okay, in order to have these outputs, so what activities do I actually need to carry out in order to get there? And finally, you think about the inputs. So what do I need? So it's human resources, might it be financial resources, might it be networks or knowledge. And only then, through attribution, you come to your impacts. So this is the basic IOOI model. So you start with your outcomes, move back to the outputs, activities, inputs, and then move forwards through attribution to the impacts. Now we turn to actually impact measurement. So you have learned about the general considerations to think of when you think about developing a theory of change. We now come to the actual measurement. And impact measurement in sustainable development refers to a process of capturing, analyzing, and evaluating social, environmental, economic, and cultural outcomes, and attributing these to the intervention to get to your impact. This actually calls for meaningful indicators for the resources you put in, for tracking the process and outputs, and for grasping the outcomes. As I said earlier, these can either be quantitative or qualitative. Usually it's a mix of both. Thinking about indicators, you might have heard of the so-called SMART indicators. These are to be specific, so clearly define what to measure and detail this. The second, the M, stands for the measurable, so it should be possible to quantify or qualify or both the indicator. It should be achievable, so it should be realistic and feasible considering the available resources and the circumstances you are measuring in. Fourth, they should be relevant. Do they actually measure your intervention's objectives? So there should be a direct link between the indicator and the objectives. So finally, they are time-bound, so you always look at a specific period in time. So these are the SMART indicators. Selecting indicators, you should utilize existing resources and data to the maximum extent because there exists already quite some data in the world, so check what is available for your project. In addition, when selecting indicators, you can closely collaborate with your stakeholders and with your community because they usually have quite good ideas in how to measure and what to measure. And also, considering selecting indicators, you should always take in stakeholder perspective to make sure their views and their perspectives are represented. And finally, when selecting indicators, you should encourage your stakeholders not only report at the end of the project, but also report intermediate progress, because that helps you really to spot wrong developments. Utilizing resources and data which are available, you can also stick to the United Nations indicators, which you then can adopt, and this is crucial, to your context and your data availability. So another key issue in developing your theory of change is really identifying and explaining assumptions underlying the causal links. This is vital for clarifying incremental steps because you're not reaching the outcomes just in one step. Usually you have many small steps, what also is referred to as transitions in the process toward the outcome. And so it's about the links and the connections between the different actions and the interventions. So questions are here. So what are relevant conditions need to hold for the causal link to work? What are uncertainties or weak spots? And do these assumptions fully explain the expected outcome? Is it plausible? Does it need testing? These are questions relevant when really thinking about your assumptions. And closely related to the assumptions is identifying risks. So, what are risks? Risks are a component of uncertainty. I do not know, for example, how frameworks will develop. How will the political framework develop? Will there be any other issues that affect my intervention? So often these are related to assumptions or external factors. Most likely, actually, external factors. For example, a policy changes. Saying, for example, in Germany, we have now a coalition where the Green Party also is part of. So our whole economic policy changed towards sustainability, at least on paper. So this is something we couldn't know before. That just happened. So I now check my theory of change and think about such risks. Usually these risks, if they really happen or come into play, they interrupt the pathway to change. So you might need to mitigate through specific activities. Since you are now ready with this Module 5, Community Impact Assessment, we would like to turn to the practical application of what you have learned. So check your knowledge. The first exercise is about exploring local actions for impact. We provide you with 2 real-world examples of local actions for impact, and you are supposed to review these examples and identify how the creation of the intervention unfolded and answer the following questions. What are the key challenges? Through what measures have they been addressed? What key stakeholders were involved in this intervention and for what reason? How might the results of the interventions contribute to systemic change? After you have done that, you can consider what this actually means for your project. The second exercise is about elaborating a theory of change. Again, here we provide you with a case, with a fictional case of a local carbon footprint currency. That is an innovative reward system that incentivizes citizens to reduce their CO2 emissions. The goal of this task is to identify how this currency can reduce carbon emissions at the community level and foster sustainable behavior by utilizing what we have learned about the theory of change. Make a copy of the Theory of Change Miro board to your free Miro account and start working. The link and all the materials are provided in the supplementary section of this module. Thank you for joining and thanks for your attention. We hope you enjoyed it.